Have you ever witnessed a moment so electrifying, so absolutely heart-stopping, that you feel your pulse thunder in your ears? Picture this: a determined police officer pounding on the front door of a modest apartment, official papers in hand, ready to remove a black woman from what he believes to be her illegally occupied residence. Neighbors gather, voices rise, and tension crackles in the air. But here's the catch: she's not just some tenant behind on rent. She's the brand new owner of the entire building. What unfolds next is a whirlwind of drama, long-buried secrets, and a stunning turn of events that will leave you breathless. Miriam Wright had always been the type of person who believed that hope could be found in the darkest places. She grew up in a tight-knit community in West Philadelphia, where modest row homes and corner grocery stores told a story of resilience. From an early age, she dreamed of owning not just a home, but a place where families felt safe, a haven in a city that could, at times, swallow people whole. In her 20s, Miriam had moved away from Philadelphia to pursue higher education at Howard University in Washington, D.C. She majored in urban development and minored in business administration. She wasn't content just sitting in a classroom. She interned for local nonprofits dedicated to rebuilding struggling neighborhoods. During that time, her mind filled with possibilities. She saw how people could transform rundown areas if they had the right support, the right leadership, and a bit of luck. After graduating, she returned to Philadelphia with renewed vigor and an unshakable belief in community empowerment. But dreams and reality often clash. With student debt piling up, Miriam struggled to find a stable foothold. She juggled jobs at a local real estate firm and volunteered on weekends, helping seniors with property tax assistance. She saw, up close, the injustices in real estate: unscrupulous landlords, families facing eviction, people losing their homes to tangled bureaucracy. It wasn't just theoretical anymore, it was personal. She'd watch an elderly woman crumple an eviction notice with trembling hands, or a young single mother cry silently in a waiting room. Those moments became the fuel that kept Miriam going. Over the years, she scraped together whatever money she could. She sacrificed vacations, fancy meals, and new clothes. Her closet was sparse. Her shoes were scuffed from walking city blocks day after day, gleaning knowledge about the changing real estate market. She learned the ins and outs, where to invest, how to negotiate, and when to walk away. The rumor swirling around some of her colleagues was that Miriam's hustle never sleeps. She was a woman on a mission. For a while, she believed she might be too late to her own dream. Philadelphia had become a hotbed of gentrification, with skyrocketing rents and out-of-town developers gobbling up properties. She watched entire neighborhoods transform at breakneck speed, pushing out the very communities that had lived there for generations. At times, despair whispered in her ear, telling her she didn't stand a chance. But she had mentors who believed in her, neighbors rooting for her. "Do it for us," they'd say with a faint smile. Her high school teacher, Mr. Clayton, who lived around the corner, once told her, "Remember the day you came to class telling everyone you'd own these streets one day. Don't let that dream die." One hot summer day, everything changed. Miriam was volunteering at a housing fair in North Philly, giving free consultations and advice about mortgages and property taxes. The event was bustling. Dozens of families stopped by, some with hope, others with desperation. She found herself face to face with an older woman named Gladys. Frail, but with a spark in her eyes, Gladys told a story about a building her late husband had owned. It was a small, 3-story structure in West Philadelphia with 6 apartment units. Maintenance had fallen behind over the years, and unscrupulous property managers had used it as a cash cow without providing proper upkeep. The tenants were constantly complaining about mold, broken pipes, and a landlord who was MIA. I just want to make sure it doesn't end up in the wrong hands, Gladys confided. I don't have long, and I can't manage it myself. I'm looking for someone who cares about the people living there, not some corporation looking to flip it into luxury condos. Miriam's heart pounded in her chest. Could this be the opportunity she'd been waiting for? Before even thinking it through, she asked if Gladys would consider selling. Gladys gave a knowing smile, her eyes full of recognition for a kindred spirit. Over the next few weeks, they hashed out details. The property needed a lot of work repairs, legal cleanups, and a stable plan for the tenant's future. But Gladys saw the passion burning in Miriam. She believed that this young woman, who had dedicated her life to helping others in the community, was the perfect successor for the small apartment building. It would take every last penny Miriam had, plus a loan from a local community bank that specialized in supporting minority entrepreneurs. But she was determined. Before the ink was even dry on the paperwork, Miriam was already meeting with contractors and local non-profits that provided grants for building renovations. She hammered out a plan. First, fix immediate health hazards, like mold and faulty wiring, then gradually upgrade each unit without displacing tenants. Miriam negotiated with the city for property tax abatements, citing the building's historic nature and the promise to keep rents affordable. The future looked bright. She was finally on the path she'd longed to tread. Of course, no good plan goes unchallenged. On the day she officially took over as owner, she arrived to find the front door forcibly jammed. A dispute had erupted between some unscrupulous property manager, someone who had been siphoning money off Gladys for years, and a furious tenant who refused to pay rent until her leaky ceiling was fixed. The tension in the building was palpable, like a simmering stew about to boil over. Undeterred, Miriam pressed on with her repairs, meeting each tenant personally. She assured them she wasn't there to gentrify or displace. It was an unusual experience for these tenants. They were used to being ignored by an absentee landlord, and now here was a black woman who cared. One apartment belonged to Beatrice Jackson, a no-nonsense single mother of two who had lived there for a decade. She eyed Miriam warily at first, uncertain whether to trust this newcomer. But after Miriam spent hours with a contractor, examining the mold behind Beatrice's fridge, scheduling real solutions, Beatrice's hardened stance began to thaw. "I've never seen a landlord go out of their way like this," she admitted. "I hope you're for real." Miriam was for real, and soon everyone in the building started noticing the difference. Repairs that had been delayed for years were underway. Miriam's presence brought an undercurrent of optimism to the old walls, peeling paint, and dingy hallways. It was a challenge, no doubt about it. She was juggling budgets, city permits, contractor schedules, and her day job, but something in her glowed with satisfaction. She was making a difference, one step at a time. What she didn't know was that a larger storm was brewing, one that began with a single, overlooked piece of paper. Among the numerous documents Gladys had handed over was an eviction notice incorrectly filed against a previous tenant. That tenant had left the building months ago, but due to a clerical error, the eviction was never closed out in the system. By the time Miriam discovered it, it was already too late to rectify it quietly. Bureaucratic wheels had started turning, and the old manager hadn't filed the correct forms to dismiss the case. Somewhere in the Philadelphia municipal court system was a scheduled hearing date for illegal occupancy of apartment 2B. The occupant of 2B was none other than Miriam herself. She had decided to temporarily move into the building while renovations were ongoing to better manage the project and to show good faith to the other tenants that she was in this with them. But the system still listed that apartment as belonging to a defaulted tenant who was under eviction. Letters were sent to the previous property manager's address, but he had vanished, and no one told Miriam Ignorant of the legal fiasco swirling behind the scenes, she carried on with her daily tasks. Meanwhile, Officer Jake Harrison of the Philadelphia Police Department's 14th Precinct was assigned a routine eviction order. The occupant of apartment 2B was to be removed from the premises for non-payment of rent. The instructions were straightforward: approach the premises, confirm occupant identity, and enforce the order. If there was any dispute, it would be settled in court, but the occupant had ignored multiple notices already which, of course, were never received by Miriam. This was just another line item on Officer Harrison's daily docket. He'd served dozens of evictions before. It was rarely pleasant work, but he prided himself on doing things by the book. Officer Harrison was a complex man. He had joined the force straight out of the academy and had made a name for himself early on for his strong sense of discipline. But like many, he wasn't immune to biases, both subtle and overt. He'd grown up in a predominantly white neighborhood outside the city, his worldview shaped by a culture that taught him to see differences before similarities. Over time, that manifested as small cracks in the way he handled minority communities, excess suspicion, a more authoritarian approach, less willingness to pause and listen to what they had to say. He often brushed off accusations of discrimination by saying, "I'm just enforcing the law." But the subtle bias was there, in the lines of his face and the set of his jaw. On the day Officer Harrison arrived at the building, Miriam was in the hallway, finalizing some painting work with a local contractor. The place smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, a testament to the changes she was making. She barely noticed the officer until he spoke. "Ma'am, can you direct me to apartment 2B? His tone was curt, his manner brisk. Miriam blinked in surprise. "I live in 2B. Why do you need to go there?" He glanced at his paperwork. "I have an eviction order for the occupant. Could you step aside, please, and let me handle official business?" Confusion tightened around Miriam's chest. Eviction order. There must be a mistake. I'm the owner of this entire building. He looked her up and down, skeptical. She wore paint-splattered jeans, an old t-shirt, and battered sneakers that had seen better days. She certainly didn't look like the typical property owner he'd encountered in more upscale neighborhoods. "Is that so?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'll need to see some identification." Miriam felt a flicker of anger mingled with anxiety. She had the deed in her desk inside 2B, and she hurried to retrieve it. But Officer Harrison was already stepping into the apartment, scanning the rooms as if searching for contraband. Then he saw the half-packed boxes, paint cans, and old furniture. It resembled a place in transition, which in his mind corroborated the notion of an eviction scenario. "This looks exactly like a tenant who didn't pay rent and is trying to flee," he muttered under his breath. Miriam was too flustered to pick up on that remark, but the tension grew, thickening the air like humidity before a storm. She found the deed, flipping frantically through the pages. "Here," she insisted, shoving it toward him. "I bought this building from Gladys Thompson. Here's my name, Miriam Wright, on the official deed. I'm the new owner." Officer Harrison frowned as he perused the papers. A wave of confusion washed over his face, and for a moment, Miriam thought this ordeal might end quickly. Yet, instead of backing off, he turned suspicious again. These documents could be forged. "You understand that, right? I have a court order for eviction. That's official. A piece of paper with some names on it doesn't automatically override this order." Frustration pulsed through Miriam. "So you're saying the deed to my building is worthless?" She snatched her phone, intending to call her lawyer, but the officer made a move that stunned her. He reached out and gently but firmly placed a hand on the phone. "Ma'am, you can sort this out in court, but I'm here to serve an eviction. Until I have official word from the municipal court that this is invalid, I have to proceed." A crowd had started to gather in the hallway. Beatrice Jackson, the single mother from down the hall, rushed up. "Officer, you can't evict Miss Miriam. She's our landlord. She's the one fixing everything around here." Another tenant joined in. "This is crazy. She took over from the old landlord who never showed up. She's the new owner. Man." The officer turned to face them with a stony expression. A tinge of defensiveness crept into his voice. "I've heard enough. I have a job to do." He read Miriam her rights, stating that if she resisted the eviction, she could face trespassing charges on the property. The callousness in his tone left the onlookers stunned, outraged. This was the woman who had been tirelessly working to improve their home, the person who had walked them through mold remediation, who had fixed their plumbing. Yet here was a cop insisting she had no right to be there. Tensions boiled over. Beatrice threatened to record the incident. Another neighbor tried to show a text chain from the old property manager, acknowledging Miriam's takeover, but Officer Harrison rebuffed it. "Video recordings and text messages aren't official," he snapped, in a voice that only inflamed the crowd further. "Court documents are." Miriam's heart pounded so hard she could feel it vibrating through her entire body. She dialed the number for her attorney, Mr. Lewis, a soft-spoken man she had consulted during the purchase process. He answered in a groggy tone apparently. He had taken a sick day. She quickly explained the situation, voice trembling. "They're trying to evict me from my own building. What can I do?" "Put the officer on the phone," Mr. Lewis said. Miriam extended her phone toward Officer Harrison, but he refused to take it. "Ma'am, I don't take directives from random people on the phone," he stated firmly. "You have 10 minutes to vacate, or I'll be forced to remove you physically." A hush of disbelief fell over the hallway. It was as though time had stopped. The sense of injustice was almost suffocating. Miriam realized that not only was she being humiliated, but also that this officer was set on following a flawed eviction order, come hell or high water. "Listen," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I'm not some criminal. I'm just telling you there's a mistake. Let's call the precinct or the court clerk right now." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then his face hardened again. It was as if he'd already set in motion a narrative in his head. Woman caught illegally squatting, fakes documents to stay put, crowd of rowdy neighbors backing her up. Stereotypes and biases wove their way into his thinking. "Look," he said, "either you leave on your own or I have to force the situation." And force the situation he did. With a single motion, he reached for Miriam's arm. A collective cry from the tenants erupted. The officer's grip tightened, and Miriam felt the cold metal of handcuffs around one wrist before she managed to twist away. She was shaking, tears burning her eyes. "You have no right!" she shouted. What happened next was a flurry of confusion. The contractor who had been painting in the hall stepped forward to protest, and the officer threatened to arrest him too. In the chaos, Beatrice whipped out her phone and started filming. Shouts rang out, bouncing off the chipped walls of the corridor. Some tenants cursed, others tried to reason. All the while, Miriam was gasping for composure, her mind spinning in disbelief. Was this how quickly one's rights could be trampled? The spectacle might have escalated to an even darker place if it weren't for the sudden appearance of an older woman. Gladys Thompson, who was supposed to be in a nursing home, had arrived, leaning on a cane, a determined set to her jaw. She had come by to check on Miriam and the progress on the building, concerned because her calls to the old property manager had gone unanswered. The second she saw the scene, a cop strong-arming Miriam, the tenants in an uproar, her frail voice rang out with surprising authority. "What in God's name is happening here?" Officer Harrison turned to see this small, elderly black woman staring at him like he was the devil incarnate. "Who are you, ma'am?" he asked. "I'm the former owner of this building," Gladys retorted, her gaze unflinching. "That young woman you're manhandling is the rightful owner. She bought it from me." At that moment, everything shifted. The officer's grip on Miriam loosened, though not completely. A shadow of doubt crossed his face. The air in the hallway felt electric, charged with the hopes and fears of everyone present. The phone cameras were all aimed at him now, tenants capturing every second for posterity and potential evidence. Gladys, her voice trembling but resolute, reached into her bag and pulled out an identical set of documents to the ones Miriam had shown. "I kept an extra copy," she said. "My husband told me never to part with the original until everything was absolutely final. These are official, stamped, and certified." Officer Harrison studied the documents, his face pale. If these were legitimate, it meant the eviction order he was enforcing was based on outdated information, a bureaucratic error that never got corrected. The ramifications of forcibly removing the legitimate owner of a property from her own residence were catastrophic. Legal suits, departmental inquiries, the condemnation of the entire community. He would face them all. The tension in the hallway gave way to a wave of triumph among the tenants. They stared at the cop, challenging him silently to defy this new evidence. "Well?" Gladys demanded, her eyes boring into him. "Are you going to release her, or do I need to call the news stations and have them break this fiasco wide open?" "Don't think I won't. I have a niece who works for the Philadelphia Inquirer." At the mention of the widely recognized newspaper, the officer swallowed hard. The situation was unraveling far beyond what he had anticipated, and his attempts to maintain control were slipping. He removed the handcuffs from Miriam, stepping back stiffly. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said through gritted teeth. "There seems to be some confusion with the court documents." Miriam's shoulders shuddered. She was free, but the sense of violation lingered like a sour taste in her mouth. She couldn't believe that, within the span of an hour, she had gone from painting her own hallway to nearly being dragged out of her property in handcuffs. The neighbors erupted in cheers and jeers. Some demanded the officer apologize more sincerely. Others shouted, "Get out! You're not welcome here!" Harrison looked around, seeing the animosity etched into every face. But rules and protocol had hammered into him that once an officer receives a court order, they must enforce it, or their own job is at stake. Except this was clearly a blatant error. "I'll have to verify with the precinct," he muttered, stepping away to speak into his radio. Miriam felt tears threatening to spill. She turned to Gladys, hugging her gently. She also embraced Beatrice and the others who had stood up for her. Relief coursed through her, but anger and humiliation quickly followed. "I can't believe how quickly he tried to force me out," she said quietly, "like I was nobody." Gladys squeezed her hand. "This is what we've been fighting all our lives, dear. You have every right to be angry, but don't let this overshadow what you've accomplished. You own this building, you're helping these people. Remember that." In the hallway, word rippled through the crowd that the officer was on the phone with someone from the municipal court. Perhaps it was a judge's clerk, or maybe his superior was instructing him on how to proceed. The wait stretched on, an uncomfortable hush settling after the previous storm of voices. Everyone watched Officer Harrison pace up and down, occasionally running a hand over his short-cropped hair, the lines in his forehead deepening. Finally, he cleared his throat and turned to face them. It appears the eviction order was never cancelled after the old tenant moved out. The occupant named on the eviction is not Miss Wright. Given these new facts and documentation, it's clear there's been a legal mix-up. "Is that all you have to say?" demanded Beatrice, arms crossed over her chest. Officer Harrison's expression hardened, as though he were balancing protocol against the tension in the hallway. "Miss Wright, I apologize for any inconvenience. I was simply following an order that was still active in the system. I'll be filing a report stating the eviction is invalid. If you'd like to seek legal recourse, that is your prerogative." Miriam glared at him, her voice tight. "You nearly dragged me out in handcuffs from my own building. I'd say that's more than just an inconvenience. An awkward silence followed. The officer gave a stiff nod. "Have a good day," he said, turning to leave. Boos and shouted insults followed him as he retreated down the stairs. No one was about to let him off the hook with dignity intact. By the time he reached the exit, the tenants exploded in a mix of relief and righteous anger. The emotional toll sank in. Miriam felt drained, as though she'd sprinted a marathon. She knew she had to press on. There were official forms to file to clear her name from any eviction database, lawyers to meet, and possibly a complaint to lodge against the precinct. But for a moment, she just wanted to sit and breathe. Gladys settled next to her on a rickety old bench in the hallway. "Honey," she said gently, "I'm sorry this happened. You were so excited about taking over. I had no idea that old manager had let the eviction ride." Her voice quivered. "If I'd known, I would have made sure it was dismissed." Miriam reached for her hand. "It's okay, Miss Gladys. You didn't know. This is on the system and that incompetent manager. Thank you for showing up when you did." The moment served as a stark reminder that owning property in a rapidly changing city wasn't just about fixing plaster and wiring. It was about navigating archaic legal systems, battling prejudice and ignorance. It was about showing up for people who had no one else to show up for them. The entire fiasco ignited a new wave of determination in Miriam. She would not back down. This building, and maybe future buildings, would serve as a model for how community-led ownership could transform lives. In the following days, she met with Mr. Lewis, her attorney, who was livid on her behalf. What they did was not only humiliating but potentially illegal, he fumed. They had no proof you were the tenant in question. They used excessive force. "We have a case if you want to sue the city," but Miriam wasn't after a payday or a drawn-out court battle. She wanted an apology, yes, and she wanted the building's records cleared of any eviction nonsense. Above all, she wanted to keep working on her mission, turning that run-down structure into a shining example of what was possible. "Let's file the necessary complaints and documents," she said. "I just want to move on." News of the incident spread, largely thanks to the videos. Beatrice and other tenants had posted on social media. Within days, local activists were calling Miriam, asking if she needed support. Some even picketed outside the precinct, demanding accountability and an end to racially charged policing. The story snowballed. A reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer, the same paper Gladys had mentioned, reached out, requesting an interview. Miriam found herself standing on the front stoop of her building, wearing a clean blazer and slacks, speaking into a microphone. The reporter, a woman named Tanya Scott, asked about the events. Miriam described the humiliating experience, the sense of powerlessness she felt when the officer refused to listen. She explained how she came to own the building, her vision for renovating it while keeping rent stable, and the bureaucratic error that almost cost her everything. "Is it over now?" Tanya asked gently. "Do you think the Philadelphia Police Department will face any repercussions?" Miriam glanced at the chipped bricks of the stoop, feeling the weight of that question. "I don't know," she admitted. "We have laws and rules for a reason, but if those rules allow for an innocent person to be nearly evicted from their home, something's wrong. I'm focused on building a future where mistakes like this don't happen, where people's rights are respected, regardless of their background. The system needs to change, and we can only do that if we stand up, speak out, and refuse to be bullied." Her story went live, and the reaction was immediate. Community organizations rallied around her. Donations poured in to help her with legal fees or building repairs. Local politicians made statements condemning any form of racially biased policing. Online, the footage from Beatrice's phone garnered tens of thousands of views, fueling a surge of support and calls for reform. Officer Harrison found himself in a precarious position. An internal review was launched. Though the eviction order was legitimate in the eyes of the system, an old, erroneous file, the manner in which he handled the case, came under scrutiny. He'd bypassed standard verification steps, using his authority in a borderline abusive manner. Nobody at the precinct was eager to defend him publicly. He became the scapegoat for a system that had allowed such outdated notices to remain active. Whispers around the station indicated that some colleagues thought he'd gotten what he deserved, while others felt he was being thrown under the bus for simply doing his job. Regardless, he found himself increasingly isolated. He was assigned desk duty, pending the outcome of the investigation, a bitter pill for a man who prided himself on being a straightforward law enforcer. But karma has a way of weaving an intricate tapestry. Miriam, meanwhile, continued renovating the building. The sense of community among the tenants grew stronger. They saw her nearly being taken away in handcuffs for a mistake that wasn't hers, and it solidified their trust in her. She was not a distant landlord, but one of them, someone who had faced adversity and still stood tall. Contractors now worked double time, partly moved by the story and partly because local non-profits threw their support behind Miriam's project. Weeks passed, and the building took on new life. The hallways were painted in warm, inviting colors. The roof leaks that had plagued the top-floor tenants were fixed. A communal garden took shape in the neglected backyard, with tenants planting flowers and vegetables. Miriam set up a small resource center in the basement, complete with donated computers so children could do their homework and older tenants could learn basic digital skills. It was a transformation that bled hope into every inch of the property. Then, one afternoon, Miriam got a surprising phone call. It was from Officer Harrison. She almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won out. "Miss Wright," he said, his voice subdued. "I was wondering if we could talk." Her chest tightened. Why would he call her, of all people? "Talk about what?" she asked, barely masking her resentment. "I've already filed my complaint." There was a pause. "I understand that. I'd like to apologize in person. What I did, maybe it wasn't entirely my fault, but I could have handled it differently. I'm at risk of losing my job, and there are questions I can't answer without hearing your side. Please." Miriam hesitated. Part of her wanted to hang up. The memory of his dismissive tone, his rough grip on her arm, still made her blood boil. But she was also a person who believed in the power of conversation and healing. "Fine," she said. "Meet me at the building tomorrow at noon." The next day, he arrived in plain clothes, his expression solemn. He stood on the sidewalk, dwarfed by the newly painted exterior. The bright color was a testament to Miriam's unwavering dedication and perhaps a reflection of how out of place the officer felt. He began cautiously. "I want you to know I was just following a court order, but that doesn't excuse my refusal to listen. I've done a lot of thinking since then." He rubbed his hands together, nervous. "I grew up in a bubble, you know. I thought prejudice was something only bad people had. I never thought I was part of the problem." Miriam listened, arms folded, not yet ready to absolve him. "And now?" He glanced at the front door, where a group of curious tenants hovered. "Now I see that I was too quick to judge. I didn't give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was my training, maybe my biases, maybe both. But I was wrong." Silence stretched between them. Then Miriam sighed. "Words are easy, actions are harder. I'm glad you're realizing it now, but you put me through hell. For a moment I was so scared. I can't even describe it." He nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. "I can't undo that, but I want to do something. I've heard you're turning this place around, helping tenants, building a community resource center. Maybe I can help. Volunteer my time, something to show I'm serious about making amends." Miriam studied him. She sensed sincerity in his eyes. "I'm not looking for a pity volunteer," she warned. "If you're here, it's because you want to learn and give back, not just check off a box." He agreed, and over the next few weeks, he surprisingly showed up. He helped repaint common areas, carried boxes of donated supplies for the resource center, and spent time talking with the tenants he once dismissed. Some of them were openly hostile at first. Beatrice refused to speak to him for days, but little by little they saw his willingness to get his hands dirty, to be part of a solution. One day, after finishing some heavy lifting in the resource center, he asked Miriam, "How did you end up dedicating yourself to helping people like this? You could be making more money flipping buildings or working for some big developer." Miriam set down the hammer she was using to hang bulletin boards. "I grew up watching my neighbors struggle. People lost homes because they didn't have the knowledge or resources to navigate the system. I promised myself if I ever got the chance, I'd make a different path." He nodded, sweaty from the effort. Maybe that's what I needed to see all along, a different path. Their conversations slowly shifted from tense to cordial, from cordial to something nearing mutual understanding. She told him about the non-profits she worked with, the local community bank that financed her purchase, and the hardships the tenants faced daily. He listened, asking questions, trying to piece together the complexities of a world he had barely noticed. Meanwhile, the internal review of his case concluded. The official reprimand was scathing. Officer Harrison displayed a lack of due diligence, resulting in an avoidable confrontation and the potential wrongful eviction of a property owner. He was suspended for 2 weeks without pay and ordered to attend mandatory sensitivity training. In the past, he might have raged against this punishment, but now he accepted it. The seeds of humility had been planted, watered by the bracing reality check he received. As for Miriam, her life took a turn she never expected. The social media posts and news coverage had turned her into something of a local figure. Offers began trickling in from foundations wanting her input on affordable housing, from local colleges like Temple University asking if she would speak at events on community-based urban development, from non-profits wanting her to serve on advisory boards. She realized her mission could extend beyond just one building. "Maybe one day I can buy the next block," she mused to Beatrice, only half joking. Beatrice grinned. "Girl, you've done more for us in a few months than that old manager did in a decade. If you can spread that magic, do it." The building itself thrived. Relationships among neighbors deepened as they worked on communal projects. A Sunday potluck in the new backyard garden became a monthly tradition. Children played in a safe, nurturing environment. The once dilapidated apartments felt more like homes filled with laughter, the smell of home-cooked meals, and trust. And then came the final piece of sweet, cosmic justice. The old property manager, who'd ignored the tenants, let the eviction ride, and pocketed rent money, was discovered to have embezzled funds from other buildings he managed. This triggered investigations, culminating in charges of fraud. The city permanently revoked his property management license, and he faced potential jail time. Miriam's name was cleared, and her building's historical record was finally corrected. The sense of vindication warmed her heart. Life, it seemed, had a way of ensuring that wrongdoing didn't go unpunished forever. The day the city officially recognized her building under a new affordable housing initiative was the day she felt all the struggles, all the humiliations had been worth it. A small plaque was mounted in the lobby reading, "This building, once neglected, stands as a testament to the power of community, resilience, and compassion." Miriam ran her fingers over the metal, tears lining her eyes. She thought of the day Officer Harrison arrived with his eviction papers, how powerless she'd felt, how quickly the system had tried to cast her aside. But she also remembered the outpouring of support that followed, the neighbors who stood by her, and even the surprising redemption of the officer who came back to help. Late that evening, she sat on the stoop with a cup of tea, watching the sunset glow on the tidy street. A neighbor passed by, waving and thanking her once again. She smiled. This was her vision coming to life, a place where families felt secure, where a police officer could learn to see past his own biases, where an elderly woman like Gladys could pass on a legacy of hope, and where a determined young black woman could claim her rightful space in the city she loved. It was more than just a story of property ownership. It was a story of triumph over a flawed system, of perseverance in the face of injustice, and of the power of human connection to rewrite narratives. And in that golden twilight, with laughter echoing from the garden, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one where each neighbor knew that home was more than walls and windows. It was a place where they truly belonged. And there you have it, the astonishing journey of how Miriam Wright, once just another hopeful dreamer, became the proud owner of a building and a powerful symbol of community resilience. From facing down an outdated eviction order to forging unexpected alliances, she demonstrated that determination, empathy, and the willingness to stand up for what's right can turn the tide of injustice. Today, her renovated apartments buzz with life and promise, and her tenants sleep soundly knowing someone genuinely cares about their well-being. If Miriam's story inspired you, if it reminded you that change is possible even when the odds are stacked against you, then let's keep the momentum going. Like this video to show your support, share it with friends who need a dose of hope, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales of courage and transformation. Together, we can spark the changes our communities deserve.